Welcome back. In this lecture, we're now going to move on to the detail paragraphs, or the paragraphs which come after we have written our overview, and how to create appropriate and easy to follow detail paragraphs. Let's return to the band descriptors for a moment. Now, the Task 1 band descriptors states that a Band 7 level essay, the type of essay we're hoping to write, clearly presents and highlights key features, and that in terms of coherence and cohesion, logically organizes information and ideas and shows a clear progression throughout the response. It is in the detail paragraphs where we will be doing the most to address these requirements. But how many detail paragraphs should there be, and what should these paragraphs include? Well, for the vast majority of Task 1 tasks, 2 detail paragraphs are enough. There are 1 or 2 tasks out there where you may want to write more. It may feel easier to write more. There's no strict regulation that you only have to write 2 detail paragraphs, but it's a case of 2 is the right number to keep things short and sweet, but also to enable you to cover enough detail. Now, what you are going to discuss in each one is dependent on the task. But in these paragraphs, you must begin to include actual figures, visible information, evidence from the graph. You did not do this so much in the overview, but you will begin to do this in the detail paragraphs. So the detail paragraphs include detail. So bear in mind, there is no one single way to approach these paragraphs. The quality of your writing and the logic behind your choices is more important than the choice itself. This is an idea we're going to come back to again and again in this lecture. So we'll now look at a number of different graphs, tables and images and explore different approaches we could take to the detail paragraphs in each. Let's start with graphs with a trend. Now, this first task is fairly simple in terms of how you would split up your detail paragraphs. What most people will think, and they'd be right, is that the first paragraph will look at the UK and the second paragraph will look at Australia. Nice and simple. It's not too difficult, this one. I think it's quite instinctive that you would pick out those 2 themes. So there's a clear logical progression. But another option is to split it April to July and then July to October, as there's a clear difference there as well in terms of what happens to the sales of air conditioning units. So they go up for the UK and then they go down, and with Australia it's the other way around. As for the key features, recall the selecting data lecture in the previous section. Remember that we do not need to include every single figure, but rather just the key figures, such as the starting points, the peaks, the low points, the end points, and perhaps the equal figures. For example, in May, they have the same figure. Something interesting to note. It's a key feature. Let's look at one that's a little bit more difficult. So in this graph here, you can see that we have 4 different categories, not just 2. So there are a number of approaches that we could take to this. The first thing we could do is look for similar lines. For example, swimming and running are similar in their direction, the yellow line and the blue line, at least initially. So we could look at them together, followed by running and basketball. Again, fairly similar because they're quite high up. Alternatively, we could look for similar themes. For example, basketball and football are both ball sports. In this case, this would leave us with the same approach. A third approach is to split the paragraphs by periods. So the first paragraph may focus on all of the categories, but only from 2001 to 2006. And the second paragraph would focus on 2006 to 2011. It may be useful here as there's a clear significant change in the graph at the point of 2006. Lots of things begin to change there. So let's have a look at one of these approaches. Now remember that all of these approaches are valid, Some approaches may be better than others, but what really matters is the quality of your writing. Here we're going to look at this idea of looking at the first half of the decade. Looking at the first half of the decade, swimming and running witnessed a near identical increase in popularity, both climbing steadily from around 20 students in 2001 to 50 students in 2006. The ball sports were more popular during this period, with the number of basketball participants rising from 55 to 61 and the number of students interested in football fluctuating between 60 and 71. Okay, we're still trying to be concise, picking out those key figures. Let's have a look at another approach. This one is looking at different themes. Looking at the ball sports, although the number of football students fluctuated during the first half of the decade between 60, its opening figure, and 71, its peak, this settled in the second half, ending at 68 students. Despite basketball's popularity experiencing similarly high levels in the first 5 years, creeping from 55 students to 61, this number plummeted thereafter, hitting 21 in 2006 and finishing there. So again, lots of key information coming through, but the paragraph is not too long. Let's have a look at a comparative graph. Here we're looking at a stacked bar chart. So, first of all, a quick refresher question. Based on the previous lecture, what would we talk about in the overview to a task like this? I'll just give you a moment to think about that. Possible answers. We could look at the fact that 18 to 30 was the most active age group across the whole of the graph. We could look at the fact that 57 to 79 was the least active age group. We could look at the fact that computer science was the most popular subject overall. It's got the highest bar there. Or we could look at the fact that mathematics was the least popular overall. It's got the shortest bar there. But what about the detail paragraphs? How would we divide our topics? Again, we could focus on similar themes. So we could look at the humanities subjects, literature and history, versus the scientific subjects, computer science and mathematics. We could focus on similar categories, for example, the older groups of people, 44 to 69, versus the younger groups of people, 18 to 43. Or finally, we could focus on similar degrees, so the most popular subjects versus the least popular subjects. This is the equivalent of a similar lines theme in graphs with a trend. Again, there is no one option which beats all the others. Pick the one you think will be the easiest to write about and try to aim for quality and accuracy and speed. Let's have a look at one approach here, different themes. Regarding the humanities subjects, these are proportionately very popular with mature students. 150 students above the age of 30 take literature courses, with roughly 180 such students taking history. History is particularly popular among 57 to 69-year-olds, with around 50 enrolling on this course, making it the most popular among this age group. However, literature is more popular than history among the 18 to 30s, with 110 students against 80. Okay, again, it's including some key figures here, but the point to take away is that we have a very clear theme. We're looking at the humanities subjects, and we're giving as much detail as we can about these humanities subjects. Now, when it comes to processes and maps, things can be a little bit trickier. Let's have a look at this process here. Because there are so many different variables when it comes to process tasks, it's difficult to give clear guidance on how to approach these paragraphs. However, you can consider these possibilities. Describing the first half of the process in the first detail paragraph, the second half of the process in the second detail paragraph. You might pick out the natural part of the process and then the man-made part of the process. You might pick out the first total sequence and then the second total sequence. For anybody who's seen that concrete and cement production task in one of the previous IELTS exam papers, you'll know what I mean by that. First total sequence and second total sequence. Let's have a look at the idea of this first option, the first half of the process versus the second half of the process. So the process begins when the heat of the sun causes the water in the sea to evaporate, which in turn creates rain clouds. The rain from these clouds fills a reservoir near the ocean. A dam with a valve controls the flow of water from this reservoir, and having powered a turbine, the water is returned to the reservoir by way of a pump. When the water is released by the dam, the turbine placed downstream spins, and this creates energy. This energy is carried by high voltage cables strung between pylons to a transformer station. At this point, the hydroelectric energy is transmitted via underground cables to power plants, homes and schools. There is some great vocabulary in here, but you'll come to vocabulary in the next section where we look at vocabulary for processes. And let's have a look at a map. So here we have a map, and again, same issue. There are so many different variables that you could have, but consider these possibilities. In the first detailed paragraph, you could focus on the older map, so maybe the map of the past or the present, and in the second detailed paragraph, you could focus on the newer map, the map of the present or the future. If it's only one map, or only one of the maps has much detail, you could focus on different areas. So you could look at the northern area of the map versus the southern area of the map, the eastern area of the map versus the western area of the map. Or maybe there are big differences in certain sections of the map. So you might focus on the industrial area and then focus on the residential area. Here we're going to look at the idea of the northern and the southern. So focusing on the northern part of the town, since 1995, more houses have been built either side of the road leading to the northwest, and a new road has been laid heading westward. In the northeast, the farmland and forest park have been converted into a golf course and tennis courts respectively. So there are no figures here. It's not a graph, but we're still picking out the details. You wouldn't pick out the details in the overview. Let's look at the second paragraph. As for the south, the shops have been transformed into restaurants, across from which the fish market has been turned into a set of apartments. Down the road to the west, a car park has been added to the home, while the cafe remains unchanged. Finally, a fishing port now extends into the sea off the coast. Okay, again, we're going to look at grammar related to maps and vocabulary related to maps in a later lecture, so don't worry about that too much here. But notice that each detailed paragraph has a very clear theme, and each detailed paragraph tries to cover as many of the key features and details as possible. That's going to be the case no matter what task you have. So let's sum up by looking at a quick review. Detailed paragraphs. These are where we should begin including figures and details and focusing on key features like starting figures, peaks, low points, ending figures and identical figures when we're looking at graphs, charts or tables. 2 paragraphs are almost always enough, and we should try to divide these paragraphs into 2 clear themes and make it clear what the themes are. There is no one best way to separate these themes, but you should choose the approach which you think will be easiest to write about. This will allow for quality, accuracy and speed. Now, quick tip, with future graphs, P1 should discuss the past and P2 should discuss the future. It's very difficult to do it any other way, so we might look at this in a bit more detail later. And remember, from the selecting data lecture, do not include any information which is not a key feature of the graph, chart, process or map. This is a waste of time, and time, particularly in task 1, is your most valuable resource. So do take care to make sure you're selecting the most appropriate and important information.